Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. We are holding over here in the discourse. We began Thursday night class. We were holding in Likutei Torah on page 56. The discourse is an explanation. Biur advarim on the Bayom ki Bayom Hazeh yachaper. And we were exploring, if you remember, we were exploring last week the garment, the white linen garment of the high priest, of the Kohen Gadol. So if you want to understand this class well, I would recommend listening to part number 1, which we learned last week, and hopefully, with God's help, we're going to finish it tonight. Here we go. So last week, just a brief summary. Last week we learned that the linen means singular because it's rooted in the singular essence. Above all, it's rooted in the infinite light prior to it grows on singular stalks. It's called bad, and the significance of that is that it comes from the world of unity, of the world of oneness, where there isn't any there's nothing plural yet. It's still the singular truth of God. And that's why it's also the color white, because as we discussed last week, whiteness is the essential color of things before it starts, before something is added. Certain times other colorings are added later, or it can even be naturally grown that way. Something is red naturally, but that's not the color of essence. The color, in other words, white is almost a colorless color. If the essence needs a color, its color is white. That's what it is. It's the color of essence. Everything else is already. So spiritually and in the godly realm, it refers to the lights. We know that all the sphirot, all the attributes have lights and vessels. Once the lights vest themselves in the vessels already color the light. They taint the light. They give character and personality to the light. And that's when the lights become very, very various different energies. There's the light of kindness, the energy of severity, the energy of like in Sfiras Omer. Every week we're now going through all the different attributes, which are all carried. It's all coming from one singular God. But as we discussed last week, like a traffic light, where there is a single light, but when it's coming through the glass, the glass is kind of tainting the otherwise pure light into being green light, yellow light, red light. And that is the idea of vessels. So all other colors are referring to the post-vessel state of existence. The color of white represents the pre-vessel state, where the energy is still simple and therefore related to the purity of the essence of the divine. But the question now becomes, why does the Kohen Gadol, out of all days, have to wear those white linen clothing? Because other times the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, wore, even when he officiated, he wore colorful clothing. There was purple there was blue, there was red, there were all kinds of colors. And then, of course, there were gold, which gold is a form of yellow, and other types of things. And then there were all the various different stones on the garments of the Kohen, which each one was their own color. So there's so many different colors, a very colorful dress. The Kohen Gadol was very colorful, very not the Hasidic garb of black and white. The Kohen was a colorful being. But yet, on Yom Kippur, he's commanded to be completely white, or at least for those aspects of the service that are related to the particular atonement of Yom Kippur. So we need to understand why is that so. So we're going to start now. We actually learned the first few lines, but we're going to go now. It's going to be pretty Kabbalistic, but we're going to, as Hashem will help. In the Haven, in your big day bad kodesh, to understand the linen holy clothing. The Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippur at Daika. Why is it that on Yom Kippur it's Dafka on Yom Kippur? Yom HaSlicha, which is the Day of Atonement, Yesh Lahagdim and Yanyin Nedua. We first have to pray for something that is known. I'm going to give you already the answer right now and there, so that you have it. And then it'll be easier to later dissect it. We're going to dissect it later. First, we're going to give the general answer. The idea is like this. Through Torah, as a result of Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. Through the mitzvahs we do, we channel God's light into the cosmos. We channel the divine blessing down, 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 down into the multifaceted, multi-dimensional, and unbelievably nuanced and detailed and multi-leveled, I don't know what you would call it, multiplicity of creation. The infinite dimensions of creation are all infused with godly light and channeled into the world through all the myriads of details of mitzvah observance and of Torah study. Torah is so complex, so many layers, so many laws, so much to study. There's books and books and books. And when we study them, we direct God's light and into all the details of existence. And every mitzvah has its corresponding effect on the world. And part of mitzvah or aspect of Torah. When, God forbid, there are blemishes, then there is a lack of that light and a lack of that holiness and a lack of that vitality. And we are responsible for making up for that lack. Now, usually the rule is once it passed the mitzvah, you can't do it anymore. And if you can do a mitzvah, then it's a second mitzvah. But the one that you missed. It's gone. It's over. And then there's another thing. In addition to the lack of mitzvahs, there's also, God forbid, that element of sinning. There's the violation, which brings in the total opposite. Instead of infusing the world with divine light, we infuse the world with satanic energies, with dark energies from the unholy side. Because God created a counter force opposite of him. Although God created it, but it still exists. So instead of infusing the world with holiness, we chas v'shalom download into the various different parts of creation same type of energies, but the energies of darkness. And the world then is contaminated and polluted with horrific pollution and contamination, and that brings the opposite of blessings. It strengthens evil and darkness and concealment and all kinds of viruses, if we might say, in the world. That's no good. So Yom Kippur is cleanup day. Cleanup day and rebooting day, refreshing day. We clean everything by getting everything back to factory settings. We get everything back to everything is flushed out and everything is clean. But how do we do that? So we have to reach the divine energy higher. We have to flood the world with a light that is higher than all the details. And when we flood the world with one such energy, it fills all the nooks and crannies in one swoosh. So what takes an entire year of detailed purification and detailed infusion, we're able to, on Yom Kippur, God gives us that kind of unique ability where he opens up our souls to a level of the divine that is usually utterly inaccessible to anybody. Because you can ask, if you can do it on Yom Kippur in 1 minute, why spend the entire year? The answer is we're not meant to access that light. We're meant to do it, and of course it's beneficial and much greater if we get to do it in a detailed way in which we match up every particular part of the creation with that matching particularized light and that particular mitzvah. It's only that God knows that he created us with evil inclination and with laziness and with all. That's why it's meaningful to him when we do choose. We have free choice. As a result of that, there will be lots of progress, but there will also be some aspects of the opposite. So we need to have a time that we can make the repair. And the way we make the repair is by transcending the entire aspect of Torah and mitzvot, which is a more detailed, adjusted, modified light to match every part of creation. And we access the pure infinity of God and bring it into existence in one split second. And the way we do that is we open up our hearts to the deepest core of our being, of our soul. We reach our simple desire or our simple essence that is one with God. When we open ourselves up to our deepest core, we open the world and the cosmos up also to the highest, deepest core, and we bring in a one illumination that can fill a lifetime of mistakes and repair everything. And that's the Yom Kippur, the magic of Yom Kippur. And that's the reading why the Kohen Gadol wears the linen white clothing, because the linen and the whiteness represents that lofty level. So in order to understand, this is in a nutshell. Specifically, he's going to explain in a more detailed manner the two primary forces that we bring into the world as a result of our Torah and mitzvahs. One is a holy indwelling light, internalized light, and one of them is an encompassing light. So through mitzvahs, because mitzvahs are the will of God, we bring down transcendental energies. In other words, we wrap the world with holiness. We bring a hovering light onto the world that hovers and wraps itself around creation. Or it doesn't mean it wraps literally. It's everywhere, but it's bigger than our vessels. It causes us to swim in godliness. Even if we're not conscious of it, but we're swimming in holiness as a result of it. You do charity in the morning, the entire day you're swimming in an infinite light. Think about that. Awesome. That's what happened. You're enveloping yourself in the mitzvah, in the godliness. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than us. It's bigger than any vessel, than any container. And when we study Torah, it's already an internalizing of divine energy. So mitzvahs sometimes are compared to garments, and Torah is compared to food. A body, a human being, in order to survive, needs food and also garments. The garments protect us from the outside. The food nourishes us from the inside. So Torah nurtures us from the inside. But again, it's not only to us. When we study Torah, we're bringing in divine nutrition into all aspects of creation. We're feeding the world. When we're nourishing the world. When we are doing mitzvahs, we're garbing the world with holiness. And in the Kabbalistic terminology, mitzvahs are or makif, encompassing light, and Torah is or pnimi, indwelling light, internalized light. So that idea he's going to develop over here, but he's going to take it to its very, very high mystical source. We have to preface first the idea, mitzvahs through the fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs. Mamshichin, we draw down oiros pnimim. Oiros pnimim means indwelling lights. Oiros makifim, and encompassing lights. And he's explain why. Because the origins of the Torah, machachma nafkis. The origins of the Torah is on the level called chachma. Torah originates in divine wisdom. And what is wisdom? Wisdom is within a person, for instance. There's a power of wisdom. That's the power. It's it's one of our powers of the intellect. And intellect is already is a vessel. It's an internal. When you're experiencing something intelligence. It's not a superpower encircling you. It's not beyond your consciousness. It's in your consciousness. You have a thought. You have an illumination. Chachma is the beginning of intelligence. It's the first flash. So it is a little bit as hovering over our mind. But yet, the fact that you're conscious of it and you see already a new insight, you see something, you're grasping something, you're touching something at least, you're seeing something, means it's internal light. So imagine that in the cosmic brain. So the flash of insight of the divine as it enters in, that's called Or Pnimi, indwelling light. When we study Torah, God is studying Torah with us, which means the cosmic brain is also conceiving new ideas. That's the concept of we draw down internal lights in the vessels. Because Torah comes from Chachma. Now its root, and we're going to trace it even higher than Chachma. Because Chachma is already real containers. When we say Chachma, it comes from Chachma. The 10 sefirot, the first of the 10 sefirot, which are real containers, obviously not physical containers, but real vessels already. So that's Chachma. And beyond Chachma is Keser. What's Keser? Keser is the infinite light, prior to its investment in vessels. But now he's going to take it further. He's going to explain that even in Keser itself, which is infinitely higher than Chachma, in Keser, in the ultimate infinite, which is, you might say, God himself, there is already, Torah can be traced all the way back into Keser, not just from Chachma. It's rooted in Keser. But in Keser itself, it's from the internalizing element that's in Keser. Even though Keser is still beyond vessels, but there is already a leaning, a certain aspect of Keser in which there is already a leaning to internalization. And that concept is called, as refers to over here, Visharsha, and its source, Memoyach Stima de Erech Anpin, from the concealed moach, from the concealed mind, or the concealed brain of Erech Anpin. What's Erech Anpin? Erech Anpin is Keser, is a name of Kabbalists refer to Keser. Erech Anpin means the long phase, but it's the aspect of Keter, of crown. But in the crown, which generally crown means an encircling state, not vessels, but yet in the crown itself, there is a level, the Zohar speaks of, called Moyach Stima, the hidden, concealed Moach, the hidden, concealed mind. You might look at it as a little bit the potential for intelligence within the pre-intelligence. Okay, obviously, I'm giving a very loose translation and very vague translation, but because I don't want to get into this right now, just that's the concept called Moyach Stima. And if you want to trace the Torah all the way up into the truly, truly, truly infinity, it's in the internalizing element of the Keser, called Moyach Stima of Keser. Shehi Nikra b'chenes or Pnimi. That's called the or Pnimi, the internalized lights. If you look at Eitz Chaim, the writings of the Holy Ari, in the portal of Erech Anpin, Perek Dalet, I looked this up today, in which he says, Moyach Stima de Erech Anpin, the concealed moach of the crown of Erech Anpin, Hanikra Chachma. That is called Chachma. So even though we're still way beyond Chachma, but it's the Chachma of Erech Anpin. Chachma will evolve. Wisdom will evolve from this. It's the source of wisdom. And this is the secret. This is the origins and the secret of Or Pnimi, of indwelling light. Mitzvahs, and the mitzvahs, however, now contrast that with mitzvahs. And imshachas, they are drawn in the Gulgulta, the Erech Anpin. They come from the Gulgulta. What's Gulgulta? Gulta is the skull of Erech Anpin. The fact that we're calling it skull means it's above the brain. That means within the keter, within the crown, it's the crown of the crown. It's pure infinite light. It doesn't have any whatsoever connection to a modifying itself to be able to receive in vessels. It's still utterly transcendent. Light as light is without its contract, without gevura that will contract it. It's more like the chesed of the light, not the gevura. The mochen is the gevura of it, the ability to concentrate. Within the infinite, the ability to concentrate. But this is still like the expression of it, the chesed, the expansion of the infinite light. Or makif, this is the lights of makif. And it's interesting, look at Eitz Chaim. So I looked this up, and Eitz Chaim, just briefly, he explains how in Erech Anpin there's three levels. There's three levels in Erech Anpin. Mamash, it fits with the morning WhatsApps that I'm sending out, that we're talking about. There's indwelling light, and we're talking about that there is a closer makif, and then there is a makif harachok, a distant makif. Two levels of encompassing energies. So there he explains like this: the moyach stima of Erech Anpin, the concealed moach of Erech Anpin of Keter, that's called or pnimi. That's the indwelling light. Gilgalta, that above the moach, there is avira. There's a little bit, in other words, between the brain and the skull, there's a little air. So that's another level. That's called avira, and that's hovering. But that's called a closer hovering light. It's hovering because it's under the skull and closer to the brain. And he says it's makiv, it's an encompassing light, but it's encompassing only relative to the moichin, to the moch stima, to the chachma stima, to the hidden chachma. But then there is a greater makiv called gilgulta. That is it's makiv both, it encompassing both, the distant makiv. Very high. So mitzvahs are rooted in the Gilgolas of Erech Anpin, in the Gilgulta. Mitzvahs is pure will of God, not the intelligence of God. The reasons of the mitzvahs are the Torah of the mitzvah. The mitzvah is a pure will of God, utterly transcending any reasoning, even divine reason. It's a will, pure will. If you find reasons for mitzvahs, that's because that's the Torah of the mitzvah. The mitzvah later evolves down lower through the contractions of the divine, And then it goes into an arpnimi, into an indwelling state, into an internalized state. And over there it passes through Hashem's brain, and reasons for it start to build. Obviously unfathomable reasons, because it's God's mind, but it's still reasons. As opposed to prior to that, it's the pure will. So a mitzvah, the most important thing in the mitzvah is not to know the reason. The important thing in the mitzvah is to surrender yourself to the mitzvah. God wants, this is what I do. And that's how you're tapping the truth of the mitzvah. You're allowing the infinite light, you're allowing yourself to bathe and to submerge yourself, or either to marinate yourself in the pure infinite light of God when you're doing a mitzvah. When you're studying Torah, you're activating, triggering moach stima, the concealed moach, also of the erech anpin, but it's already the source of internalized lights. And even though now he's going to challenge this. Now, even though regarding the Torah it says that his garments are like white snow, it's a verse in Daniel where Daniel has a vision, and he sees God, and over there he sees God. He says his hair of his head, Atik Yomin Yosef, that's what he says. The Ancient of Days is sitting. Levusha, his garment, Ketelek Chiver, like white snow, the Sareshe, and the hair of his head, Ka'amer Naka, like white, Nake, like white wool. So he sees this vision of whiteness, and he describes a garment of snow and hair. So when we talk about garment, it's obviously the concept of encompassing lights, just like a garment. But yet we know that Torah is rooted in this realm called Levushe Ketelek Chiver. His garment is like white snow. Where do we know that's from? But that's where Torah is rooted. He doesn't give a source to that, but it is known. He says that Torah is rooted in the supernal level called white snow. His garment is like white snow, which seems to contradict everything we've been saying, that Torah is not related to the garments. Torah is related to food. Torah is related to an internal light. A garment is a encompassing light. As you asked the question, Torah is also a garment, and it is also an encompassing light. Indian is going to answer, and he answers like this. This is a little Kabbalistic. This whole piece, the whole next piece, is almost like a parenthetical piece to the main point of the mimer, but he's going into a whole discussion whether Torah is internalized light or Torah is encompassing lights. The Indian, and the idea is as follows. So let me go ahead, let me jump ahead so that we have a little bit of a head start, so it will make more sense when I'm reading it. What he's going to explain is like this. Torah, of course, is rooted in the internalizing energies from above, levels of lights that go into vessels, and even when they're in the infinite, they're still already the contracted, the infinite in its subtle ability to contract itself into internalizing its lights, like we discussed earlier. It's the source of wisdom, the source of intelligence within the infinite. Yet, there is an element of Torah that is also garment, and let's differentiate between, in every element of Torah, there's two parts to it. Any subject you learn, there is a concept, there is an idea. You're learning a Mishnah. You're taking out a passage of the Talmud, taking a Mishnah, you're studying a Mishnah. So what do you have? In that Mishnah, you have a concept of the laws of Shabbat, okay, the laws of Shabbos. You have a concept. But along with the concept are the letters, there's the words. So he's going to differentiate. The concept is the internalized light. The letters is a garment. Because the letters are garbing the idea. So in Torah itself, we have garment element, but that's the letters of it. But really, even though it's a garment, it's also rooted, even the garment of it is also rooted in the internalized lights. Hold it. If it's garment, which means it's outside, why are we then saying it's rooted in internalized? Garment and internalization are two different things. The whole idea of garment that is not internalized. So the idea is that this is not a garment which is meant to remain garment. It's a garment that's meant to become internalized. It's a temporary state of garment, as we're going to see. There's certain garments that are meant to be eaten in the end. It's a type of hovering light that is meant to be. So even though it is garment, it's still it's like, I'll give you a little example quickly from the beginning, from the get-go. When a teacher gives a metaphor, the metaphor in the beginning is meant to conceal the idea. Because if you're going to fire off the idea purely in its state, the student is going to run for the hills. They're not going to understand it. You're going to crash the students' minds. Too deep, it's too abstract, it's too intense. No one is coming back. Once you gave a class that knocked everybody's head off, like no one wants to come back again. It's too. So you need to kind of give it softer. One of the ways of giving something softer is to camouflage the idea in a metaphor. You tell stories. If I make a class, if I say I'm teaching Thursday night, deep mystical teachings, yeah, who's coming, right? I'm not talking about over here. Over here we have now 300 people, but I'm being, the equivalent of 300 people. But if I say I'm saying stories, everybody loves stories. But what's the point of me telling stories? If I would be telling stories, I would be telling stories in which I can convey these certain lessons and very deep abstract ideas through the stories. We all know the famous Rabbi Nachman stories. Amazing. He takes the deepest truths and conveys it through stories. King Solomon would give 3,000 parables. Rabbi Meir would give 300 parables. So what's the parable? The parable is a means and a method to garb and otherwise abstract something in something that is concealing. But what's the point of the delivery? What does the teacher want? Does the teacher want the garment to remain a garment for the student? That the idea should forever be hidden in the garment? No. The objective is that once you hear the story and you think about it, and you think about the story and you think about it more and more and more, suddenly you break open the story and say, that's the amazing teaching that's inside the story. That's the amazing life lesson that's in the story. So what happened to the garment? It's no more covering. It's got eaten up and now becomes part of the intelligence. That's the idea. So even though there is an element in Torah that is garments, it's not meant to be a garment. It's a temporary concealment. And that's why it says, that's why it says his garment is like white snow. What snow? Water is wisdom. But because of the fluidity of water, sometimes you can't grasp it. Okay? You can't grasp water because it's too fluid. You can put it into a cup, whatever. But if you don't have a cup, so how can you take the water without a cup, without a garment, so if the water freezes into ice or it becomes snow, now you can pick it up. I know sometimes when there is when they're making a new mikvah, and you need water that is rainwater. And if you're in Southern California, this year we got enough rain, but if you're in a place where there is no water, by the way, this year, I'll tell you why. The real reason it rained in California, such crazy amount of rain this year. So let the weather experts tell you whatever they like. I'll tell you the true reason. My friend, he's in Camarillo, made a mikvah. And this year is when he opened this new mikvah. And it needed rainwater. So when it rained, the whole California got rain because one mitzvah needed to be filled. One sister needed to be filled. And he got plenty. That's the real reason. Everything else is nice. That's what we say. The whole world is here for the Torah and for the mitzvahs. In any case, so what do they do a lot of times? So he did it also because he went already earlier to get the water before he knew it would rain so much. So how do you do it? But I think he didn't get everything he needed. The rain helped him tremendously. Was that you go to places like Lake Tahoe, places up north way. And from there, you fill up a thing with snow, and then you transport the snow. It's a whole trick of how to do it. You can't just do it because it's not allowed to be drawn water. There's a way that you're not allowed to make it shuvim. It has to be whatever. You have to consult a rabbi who knows the laws of mikvahs in order to do this. But what's the point of it? Water you don't have a grasp on it unless you put it into a container. And by a mikveh, it would make it a problem. Once the water is in a container, it becomes unvalidated for the mikveh. So you have to be able to take the snow without. That's why you're taking snow. The snow, you can take it without a vessel. But then what happens with the snow? What's the point? It melts again, turns back into water. So it's the same idea like a metaphor. What's a metaphor? A teacher is able to freeze the concept into something thick and dense, so it can be given over to the student. And then the student melts it again and internalizes it. So there is an element of, and this just like it is in the metaphors of Torah, the same is in the letters of Torah. Words and letters are also covering it. On the one hand, you can't give over any idea without words. Thank God we have words, because words are ways in which we can take ideas and communicate them. And we would think that words are revelations of ideas. Every concept is revealed through words. But really, words, the way they reveal concepts and they carry over ideas, they serve as the ability to exchange ideas or to share ideas, is because the words conceal. The words act as revealers of concepts, but they do it by concealing, similar to a metaphor. What do we mean by that? If I was able to sit down over here and take the entire class and beam it to you, straight from whatever I studied, whatever the concepts that we learned in the book, and I could just beam it, beam the idea, and it's without saying a word. You would all be on YouTube. I would be, you'd be looking at me, and I would go, and I would beam from my mind into you. Then you would get the idea with such clarity. But because I can't beam it, I have no choice. I have to put it into words. Now, what happens with words is that they darken the idea. That's why he's going to bring a very amazing concept that the Talmud says that a student doesn't know the mind of his teacher until after 40 years of studying by the teacher. Even though the student was what is it called? Scrupulous. What was the word? Scrupulous, and taking notes and writing down every word and studying, because the mind of the teacher is much brighter and much richer than what the student is. So the student, even though he's hearing the words and he understands the words, but he's getting the concept through the words, he or she. And as the student, he or she gets the concepts through the words, the richness and the brightness and the depth of the concept is not there. It's there, but it's hidden in the words. And then and it takes 40 years of studying and thinking about it and relearning it and seeing it. Or it doesn't have to be you learn the same lesson, but when you learn by your teacher for 40 years, you finally have the time to develop yourself to become a true vessel, to really see the inner light that has always been in these words, but you never saw it. You crack it open, and now you can get what the teacher said. What do you see from here? That words are concealers. And that's why they're called garments. However, they cover and they hover over the idea. But again, the words are meant to be eventually cracked completely open, and the ideas and the words are completely assimilated into one, and they fully enter a person's mind. Same idea like with the metaphor. So it's not really an encompassing light. It's really a indwelling light, a internalized light, but within the process of internalizing light, it comes with garments. So that's what we mean. The Torah is lavushe ketel fever. The Torah is garment. But the mitzvahs are coming from a true income. You will never, ever internalize the mitzvah. The mitzvah will forever be above us. It's infinite light. It's not meant to be internalized. So now, let's see inside. And let's read this all. We're just going to read this in Kabbalistic terminology. And even though on the Torah it says Lavushe Ketelik Chiver, his garment is like white snow. The Torah is also a lavush, a garment and an encompassing aspect. The Indian, the idea is as follows. This that we say that the Torah is garments are like white snow. It's referring to Al Yud Gimel Tikune Diyukna. They're referring to the 13 strands of the beard. Shemnasim Lavushim, they become garments, v'choifefim, and covering Al Abba v'Ima on father and mother. Shalakach nikra Abba v'Ima datzilus anistarois. It is for that reason that Chachma and Bina, the wisdom and the understanding of the world of Atzilus, are called hidden, as it says, Anistaros Hashem Elokeinu, that Hashem Elokeinu, which are Chachma and Bina, are called Nistaros, they're called concealed. Ikenoida the Anistaros on a Yudke, that Yudke, the first two letters of God's, of the Tetragrammaton, which are referring to Chachma and Bina, are called hidden. Shem Abba ve'Ima, which are Chachma and Bina, the first two powers of Atzilus. Masha Nikur Nistaros, why are they called hidden? Because they are concealed, mechusim, and covered, b'diyukna da'arech, b'diyukna da'arech, with a beard, b'dikna da'arech, with the beard of arech, of Keser. So let's understand this. Just a little the Kabbalah of it. So we were talking about Chachma and Bina as Chachma. We spoke about as the beginning of the internal, the vessels, the containers. Chachma is Bina. Above it, we mentioned Keser, which Keser is still the infinite dimension. In Keser itself, we pointed to the skull of Keser, which is the real transcendence of the transcendence, and the moyach stima, the hidden potential of intelligence within Keser. So that's the brain of Keser. But if we're going to make Keser as well into an image of a person, so just like a person has a brain and an entire face, and then there's a beard. So the beard, there in mysticism, there's a lot of talk, like it says in the verse when it speaks about Keser. When Daniel sees the vision of God, what does he see? He sees Atik Yom, the Ancient of Days, which is Keser, and he says he has the Sa'ar Reshe, and the hair of his head, Ka'armanaka, is like white hair, white wool. And it's referring, I don't know if that's referring, we say that it's referring to the 13 strands of God's beard, which are the 13 attributes of mercy, right? So what is the beard? What is the beard of Hashem? What does that mean? Oh, wait, so before we say what it means, obviously we don't know what it means, but before we can even talk about it, let's first do the outline over here. It says that the beard of Keter, of Erech Anpin, goes down and it hovers over the Chachma and Bina of Atzilus. Chachma and Bina of Atzilus is not part of the Keser. It's already lower down. It's the lower man, Adam. And there's Keser above. It's the encompassing light. The encompassing light has strands of hair which represent the beard. Obviously, we have to recognize, remember, I don't have to say this every time, but we should say it. Is this all anthropomorphically speaking, which means nothing to do with the physicality of it, okay? So Chachma and Bina, it says in Kabbalah, are hidden. Why are they hidden? Because the strands of the beard of Erech Anpin are flowing on top of them. So they're under camouflaged and hidden under the beard of Erech Anpin. So what does that mean? What does it mean that they're under the beard of Erech Anpin? And the concept is as follows. This is what he's going to explain now. He's going to ask a question. If Chachma and Bina are the inside, and the beard is the outside, what is always higher, the outside or the inside? The pneumius is much deeper than the chitzonius, than the external. The innermost is much deeper and higher. How can Chachma and Bina, which is so much lower, be the pneumius, the inside? And Keser, think about it, the beard of Keser is, it's like the difference between the finite and the infinite. Keser to Chachma. There's no relationship whatsoever. How can the beard of Keser serve as a a cover and an external that is hiding Chachma and Bina. The idea is that the Chachma and Bina are the internalized concepts of divinity that are flowing into the cosmos. A concept, it's an idea, it's a flash of insight. But it needs words in order to come out. Where does it get it words? It's when we say the beard of Kesser that's where the 13 strands of Hashem's beard, that's where the osios, the letters are coming down, the letters of Torah coming down to serve as a containers for where the concepts are enclosing themselves in the words. And we always know that even though the letters are concealers, as we spoke earlier, and the letters are seeming to be the external of every concept. If you have a concept, the letters, the words of it are external. That's why people say, many times you say, in other words, what does that mean? You're taking these words, you're throwing them away, it's like a wrapper, and you're putting it into other words. Because you don't care so much about the words, you're caring about the concept, the idea. The words is considered superficial. Yet, the ability to have words, in Hasidus it explains, the ability to have words to convey concepts is higher even than the concept itself. That's why you have people that, even though they're very brilliant, are not good teachers. Because even though their Chachma and Bina are very powerful, but they don't have this access to the beard, to the transcendent level of Keter in their own soul, so they can't draw on the words. They don't have words. They're lacking words. So they have very brilliant understanding, but they don't have words to convey. And that's interesting. The words serve the intellect, they're external, but yet they're higher than the intellect. They come from a deeper place. So as it applies on the cosmic level, Chachma and Bina is the internal light. And the strands of Kesser that are, it says, hovering and concealing Chachma and Bina, concealing and hiding it, because it is the letters which come from the pre-mind, come from the supermind, from the subconscious. Like, we don't know, for example, the power to combine words. How do you do that? How does these particular sentence like, no one is doing that consciously, to throwing the words and the letters together. It's like an amazing power that's, you know what it is? It's the much higher you, higher than your consciousness, that is scrabbling the letters together and giving you the words and the letters to throw an idea through it. That's the concept. It's coming from a much higher place. But when it's coming down, what's happening? It's a garment. A garment meaning it's serving the intellect. It's coming from higher than the intellect, but serving the intellect. And in Torah, we also have that aspect, which are the letters of the Torah, of course. But again, even though these are garments, they're still, their essence is not or makif. Their essence is not keser. Their essence is the beard of keser. What's beard? What does beard mean? Narrow strands. That is again implying what? What is a narrow strand implying? Chopping something down into a narrow thing, which means or pnimi. Its essence is to be indwelling light. Anything that always has to do with hair always has to do with internalizing things. Because the difference between the skull and the hair is that the skull is just one piece, one solid piece. It's not chopped. It's not, so therefore it represents encompassing infinite light. Here represent already small little wires where the energy is flowing in a more directed light. So therefore, the garment that we're talking about over here, notwithstanding how high the garment is, it too is really part of an internalization. It's just within the internalization, there's two parts. There is the concepts itself, and then there is the garments for the concept. And those garments, okay. So now he asks, how can it be? Now, even though the beard is coming from the hidden moach in Kesser, Baramaz Pashas Bereshis Davches Kov B'Shema Eprei Chaim Shad Yikna Me'ira Miskainenes Megimel Meichen Chabad Ayoshim Le'ela Begalgalta. In other words, we have over there a source that shows how the Yukna, the beard, is illuminating and being established of the three Mochen Chabad that are in Galgalta, meaning so much higher than Chachmem Bina. Ashakol Zehu Lamayla Ma'aba Ve'ima Datzilos. All of this is way above the father and mother element of the world of Atzilus, of the world of emanation. Nevertheless, nevertheless, it still comes down lower. That it comes down to be a garment, which means a utility and an instrument, so to speak, a garment to help Chachma and Bina be able to be mashpia. In order for Chachma and Bina to be able to transmit, they need letters, they need words, and that they're getting from the here of Keser, from the here of the hidden Moach, which gives them the ability to find the words to be able to transmit. And now he explains the concept of that we spoke about earlier, that this garment. What's the significance of this garment? And differentiating this garment from the concept of general garments, which are meant to remain on the outside. So this is what is the concept of this lavush, of this garment? So now we're outside of the Kabbalah element. I know it was very intense Kabbalistic terminology. Now we're getting more into psychological understanding. It's like letters that are enclosing an idea. You have an idea, and the idea is being conveyed through words. Even though through the letters, even though the letters are what causing any concept cannot reveal itself only through letters. So what are letters doing? Letters are bringing something out into the open. Words bring something from a private state to a revealed state. As long as I don't put words to my emotions, no one knows them. When I put my emotion into words, then people know, okay, so what's going on? As long as I put my words to my ideas, no one knows them. You got to put it into words. What writing a book is, putting it into words. So we might argue so then why is it a garment? A garment is a concealer, not a reveal. So you can explain. The teacher explains his or her student the concept through letters, through the medium of words, of letters. But he says that's very limited. That is the simple part of the intelligence. Any concept, the more simple element. In other words, that which let's say you have bright students or good students, but that which the students get immediately, that's not the real depth of the lesson. Whatever you catch on just like that, you got to go back to something and listen to it 40 times. Or read it again and again and again. Because the first time, you're going to get it. You can walk away, I know it already. But you're knowing it externally. You don't know the depth of it. It's the simplicity of it. But the innermost and the depth of it. It doesn't reveal itself in the letters. But it's not that it's not there. It's there, but you have to really squeeze the letters to get them out. It is hidden and obscured by him in a state of concealment. That's why the sages say that a person cannot reach the mind of his teacher until you studied by the teacher for 40 years. The depth of the intelligence of what the teacher is transmitting remains for the first 39 years, remains hidden in the words. Memeno from the student. But then you might ask the question, hold it, If the depth of the idea was never transmitted in the words, so how after 40 years? And we're talking about, so you might say, good, if the student is hanging around the teacher, so by the time 40 years, now they can get the teacher. Because now they have enough, they've built up that they can get the teacher. It has nothing to do with the words. No, but word doesn't mean that. It means if you learned from someone 40 years ago, you can go back to the class that you learned. And if you spent and dwelled and relearned it, so only after 40 years, from the very lesson you learned 40 years ago, you're going to say, now I understand what he's saying. We're not talking about new information you're getting now. But hold it. How are you gleaning that material? How are you, if it's not in the words? The answer is, when we say what's given over in the words is only the external, doesn't mean that it's not in the words. It's there, but it's hidden in the words. What comes out easily from the words is the external. But what's hidden in the words is really the depth of it. After 40 years, the student is able to get it because nevertheless, the greater depth of the teacher's teachings was always in the letters. And if you remember the words, that means it's like the deeper teachings were always there hovering over your mind. You remember the actual lesson. You didn't forget it. If you remember the actual lesson, it's like this. The external part of the teaching, you're internalizing immediately. And the deeper part of the teaching is, because you remember the words, is hovering. It's there, it's hovering. And after 40 years of maturity and this mental exercises and all that, now it can land inside. Now it can be delivered. It was concealed inside the words. That which he has received from his teacher. However, it was locked, it was concealed in the words. And after 40 years, it comes forth from concealment to revelation. It's understood that the letters, which are considered garments, what does it mean? They're hiding. They are purposely concealing that the inner dimension of it should not be revealed. It's only the external, flows openly and reveals itself. And he's going to give an amazing, even you might say stronger proof to this idea. How words are limiting and darkening. Till now we spoke about teacher and student. How about a person regarding his or herself? It's an amazing example. You would think, what happens if you take an idea? You're studying something, you're learning, you have these brilliant epiphany, you have an unbelievable understanding, you have like this, and you're so excited, you write it down. Okay. We all know when you're in something, the concept is shining very bright. You write it down. You wrote notes for yourself. Okay. Pass a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and you didn't have time, you got busy with a bunch of other stuff. You go back to your notes. You take your notes out and you say, this is so cool. You're reading it. Are you reading? You're reading mamish the word. You're literally the words you wrote. Do you see the same light you saw last time? No, you don't. Sometimes you might just say, but it's not because it's It's because right now you're externally, you're floating on the outer side of these words that you wrote. Why? Because the words themselves are hiding it, even to the person who wrote those words. Even to the originator of the whole idea, it's not there. Why? Because the Talmud says an interesting thing, that the depth of your heart, the depth of your light, the depth of thing doesn't go into the words that you're writing down. So you're writing like it's, meaning it does go in, but it's hovering. In meaning that it's available. Should be that the moment you reread it, you're like should be transported back to the sharpness of the idea, but it's not that way. And it's actually, he proves it from a Torah law. From a Torah law. Great, phenomenal idea. And that is as follows. In the time of when we had Jewish courts that can execute or can administrate capital punishment in execution, God forbid, when it was necessary, there are certain rules and regulations of how that had to be done, obviously, regarding the court. So one of the things is like this. There's a trial, and let's say based on the majority, there is a consensus. A majority is a consensus to say that the person is guilty, and therefore say they murdered someone, and based on that, they need to be put to death. So the law is that the Beis Din, the court, sits all day. They debate, or how long as it takes. It might take more than a day, but as long as it takes to come to a thing. And then they're not allowed to, however, give the final verdict that the person should be executed that day. They have to sleep. They have to spend an entire night over it. So they take a break, recess. They go home. That night, they're not allowed to sleep. They're up all night. You're going to take a life of someone, you don't go to sleep that night. You don't go sit and watch television like a judge would go home in America and go eat in the restaurant. You sit all night and you can't sleep. Maybe a judge in the United States also, if he's giving issuing capital punishment, has enough moral fiber to not be able to sleep that night. But in any case, they're not allowed to sleep all night. They're up all night. They actually sit with peers and they review it and review it and review it. They get back in the morning. They take account the second time. And if it's guilty, they hand down guilty. And actually, they executed the person immediately. There was no such a thing as keeping a person on death row for 10 years. Not even 5 years, not even that very day. They can appeal, but that's how do you appeal? If the other people come, then you go back to the court. That can happen, but it's done immediately. That's the rule. That's the way Torah execution used to work. Now, there is a rule as follows, that the Beis Din on a capital case never sits down on Friday. You can do it. You can start on Sunday. You can start on Monday. You can start every day besides Friday. Why not Friday? Because Shabbos, you don't hold court. There's a prohibition of holding court on Shabbos. If you're going to do it on Friday, and it's a capital case, so let's say the verdict is going to be guilty. So what you're going to have to do is, you're going to have to come back only on Sunday. Because the next day they won't. We're afraid that the time Sunday comes, you don't remember you don't get the thing is it's already 2 days. Not vivid. It's not sharp. You've disconnected already. You're not there. So the Talmud asks the question. Hold it. Just like in an American court and in any court, there are court of what they call them. I forgot what they're called. They're called subscribers who write down. What do they call? They have a special name. Transcribers who write down all the arguments. So in a Jewish court, there were these people, scribes, who wrote down all the things and wrote down everybody's opinion, and including each judge is asked what guilty, innocent, and give the reasoning. Each one writes the reasoning down. So whatever you said is written, it's recorded. So come back Sunday morning, we'll give you the transcripts of the thing. You'll reread your own thoughts that you had then and say, and now you're back in the place. So Rashi explains, he says it doesn't work because the depth of the concept is not in the words. So when you were there on Friday, you were deeply, because you hashed it out, you were the experience of it, you were really there. Now you're an outsider looking at it. And therefore, you can't you can't say guilty now based on what you said on Friday, because you're not the same place. And if you are, you're just going to mimic what you said on Friday, but you're not really holding there now. And that wouldn't be a truth. So this is a proof, this idea, that even to you yourself, that was one of the reasons why I instituted this class years ago. Because people always learn Hasidus and we learn it choppy, pieces. Whenever you come back to something in pieces, then it's not as sharp. So I used to have stamina. And I used to teach for 4 hours, 5 hours. We used to not, the whole idea was we learned an entire discourse. And I always knew that when you learn the entire Kislev in one night, the depth and the light that comes out of it, I mean, you have to come back to a class and go part 1 and part 2 and say, everybody, remember what we discussed. Remember, that's why I spent some time, I didn't do it today, but sometimes I spend an hour and a half just reviewing the old class so that we can kind of get back into the same space we were and continue. But it's still not the same because it's a week passed by from when we were living and experiencing this idea. A week later, you just can't tune in on the same level of clarity and sharpness unless you'll relearn it again from the beginning, right? That's the uniqueness of having the entire Thursday night class being a 6-hour class. I just don't have any more that ability to do that. I'm sorry. You can listen to the old classes. You can find the ones that were like 7, 8 years ago when we did 6, 7. We did not 6 hours, but like I would say average class Friday. This was 3.5, sometimes 4, sometimes even up to 5 hours straight. Because there was it had a certain energy that I feel like we don't have today because we don't have that sharpness. But he brings it over here. The reason you can't judge a capital case on Friday, why can't you conclude it on Sunday? Because they forget their reasons. There are 2 scribes who transcribe everything that's taking place in the courthouse. They stand before them and they write down the words of those that are who are arguing for innocence, to vindicate, and those that are arguing guilt. So give the transcripts back to every person, let them read their own reasoning and pick up from there. Pirish Rashi, so Rashi explains, the nevertheless, liba de inchi loy kasvi, the heart of a person you can't write down. Which means the inner core of your heart, what you're feeling at your core being, is not captured. V'nishkach meliba, and now it'll be forgotten. Meliba, it's forgotten from one's heart where you were at that moment. Yeshuva l'tamai v'hainu, and the reason means Yeshuva l'tamai, to go back to the reason, I guess. V'hainu l'fisha pnimius asvara, the very innermost of a concept of a reason, einem is gala klal meteicha oisius, does not reveal itself from the letters. Ki muster v'nelam, it's concealed and obscured in those letters. So we used over here, so what do we see over here? That words are an obscuring force, but eventually after 40 years, you could open it up, which means it's really there. So that really means, but it's interesting. But on the other hand, there's no other way to give over concepts unless you go through the external garment of speech. So you gotta go, so you have to dim it in order to transmit it, but the source of dimming is higher than the source of the light. The dimmer is higher than the revealer. And that's why the letters come from a very deep place, that we discussed earlier. And even similar to this idea of a concealing factor that helps convey things through a concealment is also the concept of metaphor. Sometimes words are enough. Sometimes you need a metaphor. But you can't just give over the concept with words. Sometimes you also need to camouflage it and dress it in a coarse garment. You use a metaphor to garb an idea. But it's a garment that conceals even more than letters. But you're taking a foreign subject completely and using it as a metaphor. And this is the idea of lavushe ketelek. This is when we say that God's garment, when Hashem wants letters for his Torah, the chachma and the bina are the wisdom of the Torah. Chachma is the flash, the bina is the dissecting of it. But it needs words. Where does the words come from? From keter, from higher, from the beard. Where the beard comes from, the beard itself stems from the moyach stima, also from the source of the intelligence, but within the source of the intelligence, deep, the inner core of it. That's why we find that the same metaphors, you have to be extraordinarily wise. And to have words also takes a certain depth of wisdom that some people don't have. So that is because we're dealing with pre-intelligence on a very deep level. Is that this the idea of lavusha ketelek, that his garment is ketelek, is like snow, but it acts like snow, because what's the point of snow? It's frozen water, so it thickens it, like letters thicken an idea, or like a metaphor thickens the concept, so it's easier to transmit it. But then it only needs to be snowy and thick in order for it to be given over from hand to hand. Once it's by the student, the point over here is melt the snow back into water and drink it. Just like the snow, the water becomes congealed to a certain degree. If going to become snow, and afterwards it goes back and it melts. It's back to water. So to the garment. The garment conceals and obscures the inner dimension of the wisdom. It doesn't reveal itself to the recipient. It stands above the recipient from above. In a state of concealment and encompassing. This is at the time of the transmission. And maybe a little while later. But 40 years later, what happens? It melts. And when we say 40 years, it means if you have a really, really deep teacher, it takes 40 years. Other people, it can be a real distance of a teacher and a student. When it's a real teacher, like a master, and students, it's 40 years. The Rebbe spoke so much that at the end of when the Rebbe was reaching the last years of his physical appearance to us, the Rebbe was speaking that it's 40 years that I'm your teacher. He wasn't speaking him, he's speaking to my father. And it's about time that you guys get what's going on. Do you get it? The Rebbe would state again and again and again, it's 40 years. Because Moshe said the same thing to the Jewish people. That now God is giving you a heart to understand what's going on. Because you're 40 years in the desert. You're 40 years already sitting with the teachings of the Torah, and that by now you should start getting it. But afterwards it can melt, and even the inner man can come from the concealed to the revealed. Like the student, like the metaphor of the student, the example of the student, after 40 years, he gets it. So what does that mean? That the garment is not really meant to be garment, it's meant to be assimilated. So it's not what we call garment regarding mitzvahs, which is really an encompassing light, completely hovering and never internalized. This is meant to be internalized. This is the idea that the snow becomes back water again, like at the beginning. And this is the concept. This is the idea that the 13 strands of the Biur, from where the letters are coming, from where the words are coming, they're called lavushe. They're called the garments. Like white snow. They become the garments. The chachmem bina of atzilus. Which even though you'll wonder, and that's the question we asked at the beginning, how can the Keter lights be a garment for something lower? So we say, even though the garment seems to be lower than the intelligence, but in truth, the garment is always higher than the one garbed in the garment. So even though the garment seems to be serving the one inside, but the garments are really higher. Like you see, but I'll give a perfect example of that. The Kohen Gadol can be as holy as he wants, or the Kohen, without the garments, they have no holiness. I mean, they're holy, but they can't go into the temple, they can't officiate. The garments make them. So you see an example that the garments are holier than the wearer. Even though the garment is meant to bring out, it's coming from a higher place. Let's state it elsewhere, when the Torah wants to speak about the wisdom of Shlomo, of King Solomon, it doesn't say how his smarts. What does it say about him is that he was able to give metaphors. He was able to create garments. The greatness of his wisdom was, what it says, he speaks 3,000 metaphors. All these places, it is explained, the ability to come down lower and lower and lower is sign of how high one is. Yeah. And therefore, the yukne, the arich, the yukne, the beard of Erech Anpin. That's why the beard of Erech Anpin, which is rooted in the hidden, concealed mochin, which is higher than a Chachma Bina Vatzilus. Again, the beard of Erech Anpin is much higher than Chachma Bina Vatzilus. How is it going to become a garment for it? Remember, what is higher comes down to become a garment to what is lower. Now, he's going to show that something that the beard is coming from a very high place. Oh, so now we have like this. Because we really have two things coming. There is the intelligence itself, Chachma and Bina. Where do they come from? What did we learn earlier? What did we learn right at the beginning of the discourse today? Chachma and Bina come from, in their source, they come from Moyach Stima. They come from in their source in Keter, they come from the Moyach of Keter, from the brain element of Keter. Now, when we're talking about the garments, the words or the metaphors, where are they coming from? They come from the beard. And where is the beard rooted? In Moyach Stima, the concealed Moyach. So they're both garment and concept are both ultimately traced back to Moyach Stima. And why are we saying now that the garment is higher? And the answer is, yes, they're both rooted in Moyach Stima, but in Moyach Stima, there is the outside of Moyach Stima and the inside of Moyach Stima. The words and metaphors, they're coming from the depth of the depth, and that's why they're coming through the beard. The intelligence doesn't need a beard. How do we see that? Little children, before they have beards, and even teenagers and so on, they have intelligence. And women don't have any beard at all. And there is intelligence. So intelligent doesn't need the beard. But the inner pneumius of the mochin, that does need beard. Like we find that the full beard a person has when they're 20. And it is explained that when a person is, and we find in halacha, that a person is not considered mentally mature until they're 20. There's a certain level of maturity that happens when you're already 13. That's why you're responsible for a boy 13, for a girl 12. But the ultimate maturity, therefore there are restrictions. A 17, 18-year-old, if he's an orphan is not allowed, we don't allow him or her, even though to sell their father's properties, to sell and to buy, because we feel that they're not going to make mature decisions regarding real estate. They might do reckless behavior. They might sell important real estate and then use the money for reckless things, reckless investments and so on. In order to be able to make a mature decision, we wait till they're 20. And that's the same time that the full beard comes in. So what is that? What's really happening at 20? What's happening at 20 is the pneumius of the hidden mochin are now active. The innermost of the hidden mochin are active. Before 20, and it expresses itself in the beard. So the beard is a physical manifestation of the deepest mochin at the core of the. So therefore, since the words, not the concepts of Chachma are not coming through God's beard. The Chachma itself is rooted in Moyach Stima, not the beard. But the osios, the letters of it, are coming through the beard. Because the letters are really higher than the Chachma Bina itself. As we're learning always that. It's unlike physically, the beard begins to sprout. It's interesting, he says it begins to sprout. I guess he means over here that it reaches its full sprout. Actually, it says that when are you called Zakain, which Zakain really means beard, when you're 70. So from 20 to 70, the full development of the mochin. But it starts at 20. The deeper mochin kick in. That's when the mochen de gadlus shine forth. Kamaim and Azal, the sages say, limkar ben echsei aviv, to sell in one's father's properties. Achiyah ben esrim shana, we do not allow until a child and the boy that becomes 20 years old. As explained elsewhere. Nimtza comes out, Cyrus Adiyukna, the hair of the beard, Afshem Chenes Cyrus Levad, even though they're only hair. Im Kol Zare, Bayom V'nim Shachim, they're coming from a very deep place. Memoichen de Gadlus, from the most expansive mochen. Which is higher than the intelligence. And this child can be a very brilliant child, but there's just a certain depth of intelligence that is not revealed until that age. And that's why we find an interesting thing. Asaris, ein loy zaken. Saris means someone who can't have children. They're called what's the name of it? I don't even know the name in English, what the person is referred to. And they don't have a beard, and which means also that they don't have the ability to they don't have the reproductive ability. And they don't and called the Saris. Now why? Having a child really means accessing the very quintessence of your soul, which is the depth of the mochen. Because you have to replicate yourself. Because you can't get to the external intelligence, you have to get to the very substance of the intelligence, the inner core of the mochen. And the Saris doesn't have that ability. It's not able to draw from that place. And therefore they can't have children. And what's the sign of a Saris is that they don't grow a beard. They don't have. So you see that something so deep expresses itself as something so external, just like here. Very external, but yet he doesn't have the power of reproduction. Finally, the ability to reproduce comes from the strengthening of the mind, from the deepest inner core of the mind. And it obviously doesn't take a genius to create a child. But we're talking about that God put it into the animals also engage in reproductive activity and create children, which are also drunk. Obviously, God created it as part of the physical biology that we can stimulate and draw down on such a deep level. It's not like you have to be a brilliant scientist and you reach the deepest levels of understanding and then you can have children. It doesn't work that way. We're talking about an essential element of Pnimius HaMoichin that automatically is part of a person's development, and it doesn't kick into that it should make its way into that you should have access to that depth of self until that age. The Asaris and what is Asaris? There's an English word for it. I forgot already. Shachasa by Koyach Zeh that doesn't have this power. Ein Loy Zaken doesn't have a beard. And V'chein Noshim Shadaiton Kalas Ein Lim Zaken. Women don't either have the beard, because this level of moichin, of pnimius hamochin, to be able to draw that forth it's not what they need to do. It's what needs to happen for a man, not for a woman. And therefore the power to create by her is not from within herself. Meaning her ability of reproduction is basing it on the substance of her husband. But it's not an original power of Haylada, of reproducing. And it has to do with the concept of Chachma and Bina. Bina means to take what is and develop. His power is to dig to the essence and draw out, and her power is to build on that and to create. And that's where she needs to have her ability. He needs to have his ability. But his ability of a man expresses itself in beard. So a beard is very masculine, obviously, and it actually represents the deepest power of one's masculinity. And now we'll understand this, that the Torah, which is rooted in Moyach Stimo, Nikra Gam Kein Levushe, is also called a garment. It's the letters of the Torah, it's the maturity of the Torah, the letters of the Torah, the beard of the Torah, which is called the Dain of Chenes HaDiyukna, which is the beard, Hadikna, which is the beard, Shuhu Levush, La'aba Ve'ima. It's a garment for father and mother, Techach Mebina. Aval Makom Makom B'Shayrish HaTorah, B'Moyach Stimo, B'Chenas Or Pnimi. However, the general element of Torah, both the garment element and the inner light that's inside the garment, are all rooted really in a level of pnimis. Because again, it's meant to be internalized energy. And even the garment is meant to be internalized, as we discussed earlier. So this was all, I would say that this entire piece from here, from when we started this whole long conversation, it's all parenthetical to the main concept of the mind. What is the main concept of the mind? That there are two powers, spiritual holy powers. Now we're going to go back to Yom Kippur and all that discussion. Now wow, there are two powers which are Torah draws down the internalized light, lights that go into vessels. Mitzvahs draw down the encompassing lights of God. And when we learn Torah and we do mitzvahs, then we're actually bringing down everything the world needs. Its holy garments and its holy sustenance. However, God created that there should be opposite forces as well. And they too provide garments and they too provide nourishment. But corrupted garments and corrupted nourishment. And sadly, because God gave us free will, there are options. And at times we choose the right garments and the right sustenance. And at times we choose the other stuff. And as a result of that, we cause, God forbid, lots of blemishes. So we need once a year that we transcend all levels, even the level of garment, and we go all the way up to the level of essence, like he's going to explain. And from there we fix it all. That's where the mimer is going. Now one opposite the other, just like there is Torah and there is mitzvahs. And Torah represents internalized light, and mitzvahs represent encompassing energy. So he's now going to show the parallel of that on the unholy. And what's the Torah and the mitzvahs of the unholy? Well, there are two powerful destructive forces in a person's life. Taiva. Sages say three things take a person out of the world. Akina. Kina means jealousy. Envy and jealousy. Va'ataiva and lusts. Va'hakavod and the seeking of honor. People that are chasing after honor, it's these things that literally kill a person. They destroy a person. Might see in us Adam and Olam, take a person out of the world. So for some reason, he drops the jealousy part over here. He doesn't talk about that. And he talks about the other two. Lust, which really means being a pleasure seeker, which is pleasures coming from food, being obsessed with eating, with the pleasure of eating food and other forms of pleasure, which generally is called internalized. It's usually, primarily he's talking about indulgence in food pleasure. Now, food is what? Which we know that there's a mitzvah this week in the Torah called, second Torah portion begins with holy you shall be, which means don't be obsessed with eating, with the sensation of food. And if one does, that's considered sinful, even if it's kosher food. And that is the counter to Torah. Torah is food, holy food, and then one can become obsessed with eating on a literal level, which is the count, which pollutes the soul. And then honor is what? The need to be always given attention to and to be honored. The fact that a person is an attention seeker and is constantly looking to be honored and to be recognized and so on and so forth. And when people don't give them the right honor, they're insulted and they're offended and all this kind of stuff. That's a more hovering energy. What's honor? Honor is not an internalized type of satisfaction. It's something that you want to be surrounded with honor. It's like an encompassing energy, but it's a dark energy. And he actually says that, guess what? Because it's an encompassing energy, it actually expresses itself in clothing. Meaning someone who is an attention seeker will seek their honor through dressing up very, very attention grabbing. meaning very into their clothing, and they boast by walking into a room, and they're already boasting. But take a look at my cufflinks, take a look at my shoes, and look at my situation, and they're very full of themselves in their garments. So this element, if it's used in a non-holy way, actually 2 days ago we were learning the Sikha, the Rebbe is saying that Mashiach world, we have to dafka express all the holiness in physical garments. And you have to be dressed beautiful, but that's coming from a whole different place. That's coming from a place that you want to honor God. It's already post-Mashiach. It's a whole different reality. But we're talking about someone being snobby and trying to find attention and for themselves, not for any divine service, just that want people to notice and recognize them. So that's the beautification of a person through their dress. Now, this is not so applicable to women, because women are not boasting so much always with their garments. A woman is essentially supposed to look good and dress well. Or in the world of Hasidism, when men started getting dressed and into their clothing, it was very, 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 very looked down at. It was very, very considered an extreme expression of ego and so forth. It was very not applauded. And he says, pleasure seeking and honor him. They're internalized lights and encompassing energies, but from who? Not from the side of holiness, the noga. It's coming from the glowing shell, because it's permissible. It's coming from the glowing shell. We're not dealing with wearing wool and linen together, which is a forbidden garment. We're not talking about stealing to wear clothing, that's also forbidden, or non-kosher food. Kosher food, kosher enjoyments, and kosher honor seeking. What I mean kosher is that you and he says kiyat taiva, and explains what it is. Because the lust for pleasure, to be a wine drinker, basar, and a meat guzzler. Zahu mazain, this is food. It's a corruption of food. The orpnimi, and therefore internalizing klipa, unholiness. The noga of the klipa of no, because it's kosher, so it's v'hakavod, and the seeking of honor. The gases aruach, and the thickness of spirit, which means someone who's so into boasting himself and makes himself into a whole, but through what? Bilavishas big day covered. The fact that the person is dressing up with fancy schmancy, crazy Italian expensive suits and shoes and this and that, just to make a statement, and that everybody should notice it. Zahu makifim de noga. This is the impure, encompassing lights of noga that do even more damage to the soul. Who's zelu umazeh? And it's amazing. This is the corresponding impurities, neged apnimiyim umakifim de kedusha. They stand in complete opposition to the internalized lights and the encompassing lights of holiness. Mitzvahs, encompassing lights. Torah, internalized lights. And impurity is to putzen sich, like you say in Yiddish, to overly indulge in one's looks and to indulge in one's food. It's these two elements, and the seeking of attention, as we said, that this is bringing an impure energy over a person, and obviously chasing the holiness away. Now, it's the opposite. The encompassing and internal lights that come and usually are downloaded to us through Torah and mitzvahs. And why? Because what's the root of taiva? What's the root of lust? Why is a person chasing after the enjoyment? It's because they feel themselves very much. You should be busy. I mean, you have to eat, you eat, and then go further. Eat your food and go further. Why are you so busy with spending so much time to make sure that your food is going to be top notch? And it's because you feel yourself a little too much. Instead of feeling your mission, you're feeling yourself, and you want to feel good. You want the pleasure. You want a watering mouth. You want to enjoy. You want your taste buds to sing all day long. It's because you're busy with yourself. That's the opposite of holiness. Holiness is surrender to God. Now, honor is even more obsession with self. So you want everybody to give you attention. It's all about you. That's the total antithesis to holiness. Holiness is to run God's program through you, to be nullified, to recognize that He is, and you are, and we are lucky to be vehicles and channels for Him. So if you want to honor, the honor should be going to Hashem. So that's what a Kohen, when he wore beautiful clothing, it wasn't his honor, he was a God's servant, and the God's servant should be beautiful. That's why you had great tzaddikim who didn't wear special beautiful clothing, because they were egoless, and it wasn't drawing any attention to themselves. It was to the servant of God, who is now, because they had no self at all. But when someone has not yet taken care of their ego, and they're wearing the garment to boost their own existence, that is ego. That's the opposite of holiness. The foundation of holiness is a state of nullification to the infinite one, blessed to see. And now he explains, and that's why mitzvahs are what? What are the mitzvahs? You're running God's will, not your will. The mitzvahs and now he's going to make mention of something over here quickly. We're saying that mitzvahs are the encompassing lights, but in the encompassing lights, there are two levels: a closer encompassing light and a more distant encompassing light, referred to as Or Yashar v'Or Chayzer, which we were talking about in my class that I deliver on WhatsApp every morning. For those of you who want to, I think I should post it on the YouTube so you'll see it, so you can subscribe to it. It's a class for 5 minutes that I give. So there we were discussing a lot about this Or Yashar and Or Chayzer. The Or Yashar is a closer makif, a hovering light that's closer, and its nature is downward. And Or Chayzer, its nature is to return into itself. It's a retracting light. So in mitzvahs, when a person is doing mitzvahs, he's going to explain how in the mitzvah you have both. Since mitzvahs are supposed to bring down the makif, in mitzvahs itself, the main idea of the mitzvah is it's the will of God, and it's the flow. What does that mean? You're expressing godliness, and the mitzvahs are a flow of godliness from a higher world to a lower world. That's why all mitzvahs are called tzedakah, charity. So in that sense, you're in every mitzvah, you're expressing Hashem's energy into the world. So that's why it connects to the lower makif, which is all about an influence flowing downward. Sidkas pirzaynai b'Yisrael, that Hashem's tzedakah, that he's pirzayn, he's channeling, he's spreading himself out and funneling himself down into Israel, which is associated with the idea mishmei ameva yohiv, that from a heaven they're always giving. It's the nature of the divine to give and to give, which means it's total opposite of being stuck up in self, where you just want to take. It's give. So when you're in a mitzvah, when you're doing mitzvahs, we're tuning into that energy of giving, of project, and you're tuning into God's energy of giving. And when you're doing, but it's not about self. It's about that flow, and it's usually about giving. Chenes Or Yashar, it's direct light. Now, even though sometimes in a mitzvah, there is also in mitzvahs, there's also sometimes the opposite, not a downward flow, but like an upward. You're rising like in prayer. You're seeking for light. You're seeking to get more. Most mitzvahs are about giving. There are mitzvahs which are meant to elevate you into a higher place, which we would think is what? Doesn't have the nature of holiness, which is all about giving. It's quite on the contrary. It's to rise into a deeper, richer experience. Yeah, but what are you seeking? You're not seeking to, when you're rising up into a deeper, this is how the Mittler Rebbe explains this. You're not seeking to experience for yourself, to be somebody more. The reason you want to rise is because when you will rise into a deeper consciousness, you're going to be more not. You're not going to feel yourself. So even the rising of holiness, which is the opposite of the giving, is not to be more, but to be melted more. To be more not. To be more lost in the infinite light. So in holiness, it's all about bittul. And even in the Or Chayzer, who bittul atzmusa, it's the nullification of self. You don't want anything. You don't want worldly matters. And even the spiritual, you want to dissolve yourself, which isn't the case in Klippa, which is the unholy. Which isn't the case of the Klippa. Yesh, noiga, so caught up into itself. It's so stuck up in its own ego. Hapech bittul, it's the opposite of nullification. And these are these two powers of lust, which is all about self, seeking always to pleasure the self, and the honor. So it's the antithesis to these two forces of Torah and mitzvahs. And that's even when it's permissible stuff. The Ein Tzarech Lo Medaber Isur Gomer, when we're talking about something that's forbidden, Chas v'Shalom, God forbid, when a person is sinning with things, eating things you're not allowed to, or a type. So Shem Pnimi Makif and the Gimel Klippas Atmeyas, then God forbid the person is downloading onto his or herself really, really dark satanic energies, really, really dark and aspects of the three impure klippas completely, Shalomata Mata Minoga, that are much lower even than the klippas Noga. And as a result of that, which sadly, living life in this world where there's so much temptation and so much distraction, it happens to the best of us, to all of us, that we sometimes draw upon ourselves these negative energies. And obviously are lacking in the drawing down of holiness. So this is where we come Yom Kippur, where we have to fix all of this. To fix all of this, we have to reach a level that is higher than both the indwelling lights and the encompassing lights. Even as high as they are, they're still deeper than that. And that's Yom Kippur. So now we go to chapter number 3, which is Gimel, which is Yom Kippur. In Indian Yom Kippur and the idea of Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur and the idea of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Yom HaTshuva, it's the Day of Repentance and the Day of Return. It's a day of forgiveness of sins. Ooh, what is the idea over here? It's through the revelation and the drawing forth. It's opening up and drawing down a powerful, great radiance. May Oirein Soif Baruch Hu, from the infinite one blessed to see. Mashallah Maila, with that which is above. It's above, not just above. Even from the encompassing and internalizing godly, divine energies that we spoke about before. That are generally drawn down through Torah and mitzvahs, through the Torah and the commandments. And once we can activate that light, it fills all deficiencies and all blemishes, Torah mitzvahs, that is in the Torah and in the mitzvahs. And the idea of this tremendous radiance, I know, and that is Kinyan Mavur Lamaila, because we explained earlier that the makif, the encompassing lights, and the internalized nimshachim, they are drawn megalgalta from the skull, umoicha, and from the brain of Erech Anpin. Remember, the brain of Erech Anpin is the source of the pneumius. The skull of Erech Anpin is the source of all encompassing lights. This is the idea of the flow, the download, Likutei Torah mitzvahs, that is being downloaded through Torah and mitzvahs. But on Yom Kippur, Yom HaTshuva is the day of repentance. Who his galos, on that day, what is opening up for the world and is opening up for the Jewish people. Who is galos atika kadisha. And what is opening up is the revelation of the holy ancient one. Stima, the kol stiman, that is concealed from all concealments. Shalamayla mabchenes galgalta, is way above the skull. The keser, the Erech Anpin. And it's higher than the crown of Erech Anpin. It's higher than the entire realm of Erech Anpin. Because Erech Anpin is only a radiance of Keser. It's not the essence of Keser. It's let me just quickly say this idea. Keser is meant to serve as a medium between God himself and the attributes. Between the Or Ein Sof in its purely simple state and the attributes. It's meant to be the mediator between the two. Every mediator, the interface. Every mediator must have within itself, it has to bridge the gap between the two parties. So if Keser is meant to bridge between the Or Ein Sof and the attributes, the divine attributes, so it has to have in itself of both. And that's why we speak that in Keser there's two levels. Erech Anpin that we've been talking about before, all these levels of Erech Anpin, whether it's the hair and the beard and the brain and the skull. And the entire Erech Anpin is called a long face, because even though it's long, which means it's completely infinite, it's long, but still a face. We're meaning to say it's a source for the face, which means for particular features. It's the source. That means it's like someone who's mediating between English and Spanish. And let's say you want to take from English and transmit to Spanish. It's the source. It's the mediator's knowledge of Spanish. But then there is the higher part. I'm using English and Spanish. It can go either way. Spanish can be the higher, the English to Spanish. That's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm just showing that there's two sides to it. The other side of Keser is reflects and has within it the pure Orein Sof. That level of Keter is called Atik Yom, the Ancient of Days. And its elevation over the lower part of Keser is infinite and without it. Usually Torah and mitzvahs were interacting with the Orein Sof, but on the level of the external element of Keser. In it, there's the internalized lights, the encompassing lights. But in Yom Kippur, we're reaching into God's very self. The Nikra and this level that is beyond Erech Anpin is called Makar HaTanugin. It's the source of all pleasure. So if Torah and mitzvahs are a pleasure of God, this is the source from where all that pleasure comes from. Like stated in Zohar Parshas Emor, next week's Parsha. It says, with you is forgiveness. With you, with your essence. With you, the same Makar Chai. It's not life. Life is Keser. That's where life comes from. This is the source of life, where life itself is produced. Kedish Makar Chayim, the source of life, or Makar HaTanugim. It's the source of all pleasure. It's way above the skull and the hidden intelligence, which the skull and the Moyach Stima are parallel, are what we say. It's Hashem's will and Hashem's wisdom. And will and wisdom is considered feature. Wisdom for sure is considered a feature of the soul. A person's wisdom is not it's not your soul, it's not your essence. It's a feature of your essence. It's a component, it's a power that you have. Will is higher than will is more than just a feature. Will is a person's self. I want, it's the very I. But still, it's the person as they are turning outward. I want something, I'm reaching for something. Deeper than all of that is the inner world of self, the pure essence of the inner being. And God, as God is for himself, not even in a state of relating to anything outside, which is the Ratzon. So Erech Anpin is like the will, and the Moyach Stima is like the wisdom already. Because only a ray of this pleasure, a ray of Atik Yomin, an external ray of Atik Yomin, Nimshach u'mislabish b'haratza, is drawn and encloses itself in the level of will. Will obviously feels pleasure. That's why in every will that you have, there is a sense of pleasure. Because what's driving the will? You want something because deep inside you sense there's a pleasure there. So there is some investment of pleasure in will, but it's a minute element of the pleasure. It's external of the pleasure. The innermost of the ratzon is the pleasure of the will. And that's the pleasure that there is in a mitzvah, the divine pleasure of the mitzvah. It's the pleasure of God vested in will, or the pleasure of God vested in wisdom, like an intelligence in a person. When we study, when we learn something, there's pleasure in it. But that's not your core pleasure. That's the pleasure of the person vested in something else. It's pleasure mixed into something. But then there is pure essence of life, which is a pure ocean of pleasure. That's much deeper than any consciousness. We don't know that pleasure because it's too deep. It's the pleasure of just being alive. We don't know that pleasure. It's too essential. And that level is called, regarding in the cosmic order, it's called Atik Yom. The boundless infinite pleasure. and that place opens up on Yom Kippur. When this is revealed, usually it's shut. That means we're not interacting with it at all. In other words, God never makes himself so vulnerable like on Yom Kippur. He opens us up to his very, very heart of hearts. With this level of the essence of the supernal pleasure, which is what he refers to Ayin Kuf, which stands for Atik Yom in the Ancient of Days. I'm sorry, not Atik Yom. Atika Kadisha, the holy ancient one. That fills all blemishes. That is in the encompassing lights and indwelling lights. Whether Galgalta, whether it's from the skull, which is the encompassing, Umayach Stima, and the internal lights, which are related to the brain element. And that's why the sages say, the place that the penitent stands, ain't tzaddikim gemurim yochaylim lamed, that even the perfect tzaddik cannot stand there. What does that mean? They're not even capable of standing. Because what is the perfect tzaddik doing? The perfect tzaddik is downloading all the mitzvahs, fulfilling all the commandments, but that's all from the external of the crown. The Baal Tshuva opens up the door to the essence of God. And that is incomparably higher. And that's why Baal Tshuva can do in 1 minute what takes a lifetime of work. Because you're touching essence. Man Yashuv, Yashiv Atika Kadisha le'izgalia. Who's doing tshuva? Atika Kadisha is being revealed. That's the essence of tshuva. Is that in Yom Kippurim? That's the idea of Yom Kippur. And that's why the Kohen Gadol, he is the one who's going to serve as the channel. Through his power, imagine the holy priest, who he is the one that has to open up the key to that place, right? He is the one who opens us up to that dimension. Namar boy, it says by him, Bad Kodesh, holy linen, Yilbash, because this level is called, this is called singular. This is Bad. Bad means singular. On this level, there is no possibility for worlds, no possibility that anything other than God. It's the very essence. As he said, the external of Kesser is already considering that there's going to be shapes and forms and attributes. This is God as he is completely within himself. And that's called singular, Bad, and it's called white. And big day love, and they are the white garment, Shugav and Atzmi, which as we said before, it's the color of the essence. Tainug, Gilui Atzmi Tainug, it's the revelation of the essence of the pleasure. Shu Pashat, which is simple like white. Tainug Shulamayla, it is higher, Mipchinas Tainug, than the more external pleasure, Shemitz Tzamtzim, that contract, Lias Malumish B'chachma. See, the other pleasures of God are already called coloring, because it's already mixing. It's mixing into wisdom. It's mixing. It's already, there's additives added. There's something other there besides the pleasure. The pleasure is now expressing itself through a good idea, through a beautiful thought, through a beautiful inspiration, through this mitzvah, that mitzvah. These are all colorings. But Yom Kippur, the reason you can atone is particularly because you're touching the pure essence. Because the source of pleasure, that's God's very essence. It's not like the way we know pleasure in our own experiences. Our pleasures come from things that are outside of us. Where do we get pleasure? From a good piece of cheesecake, we get pleasure. So we derive the pleasure from the outside. Or from learning something. We study something, we become the study provides the pleasure. Or as we said earlier, cheesecake or food. The reason I'm talking about cheesecake is because we're already preparing, thinking about Shavuos. By God himself. When you say God has pleasure, where is the pleasure coming from? There's nothing outside of it. So it's self-generated pleasure. It's the pleasure of himself, in himself, from within himself. And it's not, there's no two in him. There's not many. So how could, And so the pleasure must be the essence. So we're talking about the essence of pleasure and the essence of life. We're not talking about something there other than the essence. The essence and the pleasure is the essence. And that's what the color of white is representing. Ella, however, later on in the process of evolution and the process of creation, little tidbits or little rays of this pleasure mix into the latter dimensions of the divine being, and eventually makes its way all the way into creation, into all the pleasures that we have. Through these narrow veins, if you might call it, through contractions, then it becomes enclosed in wisdom. And that's why this pure linen clothing, this is touching upon the essence of pleasure. Over there, it is simple. It is not mixed with anything else. And enclosed, b'shum davar. It's not invested, enclosed in anything, and it's in its purest, most pristine, essential state. By way of course, this is all, even with all this abstract thinking, we're abstract, we have to realize it's all anthropomorphically speaking regarding God. It's so much deeper, higher, beyond our impossible for us to understand. But we get the idea in the sense that another thing, as it says in Likutei Torah. I was looking for this. Likutei Torah over here, he must mean Arizal. I don't know where the Arizal says this, and it doesn't get in the source in the back, it doesn't say. Because I didn't understand what he's adding over here. Bad, he says that the concept of bad, of linen, nimshach, is drawn mitaf almen dechsufin, from the 400 worlds of longing, which these 400 worlds are not worlds, they are lights, shefa, of the flow of oina ge'elyon, of the supernal pleasure, hanimshachem atika kadisha, that are drawn from the holy ancient one. What is this adding? What is the for? In other words, it's the essence. That's what it is. It's the revelation of the essence. Why are we talking about 400 silver coins? No, why are we talking about 400 worlds of longing? Because this is really rooted to and hinted to in the Torah by the 400 coins that Abraham paid to get, Avram, our father, paid to get Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the tomb of in Hebron, the tomb of the fathers and the mothers, the Machpelah tomb. He paid 400 coins. So the Zohar makes a big deal about Avram with these coins. And it says the 400 coins are the 400 worlds of longing, which are revelations of the deepest divine pleasure. So you're talking about Avram paid a very hefty price for this Ma'aras HaMachpelah. Imagine if it was worth giving, who did he give it to? He gave it to Ephron. He gave over to the Klippa, the 400 pure worlds of coins of Keser. What in the world are you doing, Avram? I guess. And then later, because it went into the Klippa, there were 400 men that were coming with Esau to attack Yaakov, are related. They're plugged into these 400. What basically tells us is that in the unholy is really where the treasures are. And that's why we learned today, yesterday, how only through dealing with the world and getting through the darkness of the world do we extract the ultimate redemption. Because we need to get back these 400 coins of pleasure. But regarding these 400 coins, now what does coins have to do with pleasure? Because it was silver. Silver comes from the word longing, kesef in Hebrew longing. It's the longing for the pleasure, the longing of expiration and pleasure. Now, what does it say when Avram gave these coins to Ephron? It says it was over lasocher. Simply, it means that he gave him the most desirable coins, that no merchant will turn them down. It's like usually you're passing on, the guy will look in, especially those days when everything was, the coins were everything. So they would look and say, this is over the soch. It passes to everybody would think. It was like it was the Mercedes coin, I don't know. It was the most perfect of coins. But the deeper meaning is If we're talking about the 400 lights emanating from the deepest, from Atika Kadisha, higher than, right? That's why it's called over. So over means it goes over, it's high. Over means to pass over. And actually, hit in the word over, you got the word over. And in the English and the Hebrew naturally. Socher means a merchant. But why is a merchant called a socher? Because socher means to go around and around. What does a merchant do? He hustles. He runs to this one, he runs to that one. He lives his life going in circles, going here, going there. Socher means a circle. Over la socher means what circles the circle. So what's the circle of the circle? Earlier we spoke there's indwelling light and there's a circle light. Then there is way, way above both the indwelling light and the circling light. There's what circles everything, and that is Atika Kadesh, what circles everything equally. And that's the coins coming from that place. So from that, and that's called the Bad. That level is called Bad, and that's where the Kohen Gadol is tapping. The place that's over La Seicha. The crown is called a socher, because the crown also goes around, circles the head, and this goes around the crown. The Gilgalt and above the skull. Because the crown and the skull are called schar. Schar means around. And this draw that we draw from on Yom Kippur, it's above these makif lights, and it's called that I mentioned earlier. Okay. Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Gadol. Shaloivish big day bat kodesh, who wears these holy garments. Asher abagadem hem makifim. So now he's doing two things. Now you realize it's not enough to tap these lights. Yom Kippur, we're not meant to exit our existence and lose ourselves in this level. Because even though we're touching this, the point over here is to bring it back down into our world, which means, and to make the repairs on the level where there is the design, and on the level where there is vessels and containers and details. What you're doing over here is you're accessing the light and drawing it down, so to fill all the holes and all the vacancies and all the damage that was done, to repair it. That's why here's the idea. Where are the blemishes made in the garments? So what he does is he takes linen and he takes the linen into the garments. The garment is where he's bringing it into. He's bringing it into the garments of the cosmic garments to repair all the lights that are in the keter, which is the garment, and that level. So he has, but the linen itself is from the place that's beyond the garment, and he's making it into the garment, that's the whole work of Yom Kippur, to take it into the place of, to draw from the higher circle into the lower circle. The garment, the clothing themselves are the makif. From the simple holy linen, that is higher than the encompassing lights. From there should draw down a new makif, a new encompassing energy, fresh, rebooted, unblemished, and healthy, and everything is good. That from the bad, from that very holy place, is drawn to fill up all the blemishes. Shebe makifim, that is in the encompassing lights, upnimiyim, the kedusha, and in the internalized lights of holiness canal. It's the idea of over l'soicher. She'oivrim, we go above. We go above and higher from the socher, from the encompassing light, to B'chinas Makiv canal, and we go higher than it and then draw down into it. And that's the reason why on Yom Kippur also we keep on saying Vayavar Hashem al panav. We cross over Hashem. We're going over Vayavar, the Yud Gimel Midas Arachim, of the 13 attributes of mercy. Now, what does it say in the verse? Now, being that the blemishes are both in the internalized state and in the encompassing energies, because Torah and mitzvahs is where we blemish. So he's going to show us how, when the Torah speaks about the tikkun, by bringing in this higher dimension, how it's relating to both the blemishes that are made in the internal through the non-kosher eating. I don't mean non-kosher food. I mean non-kosher eating, non-holy eating, or pursuit of food and all other pleasures, and through the non-kosher garments, the corruption of ego, which cause a blemish in the encompassing energy, and how this tikkun of Yom Kippur light fixes it on both levels. And it's hinted to in the verse. There's a verse in this week's Torah portion, Achrei, which says, why should you do all this work? After the Torah concludes the service of Yom Kippur, the Torah says, Ki Bayom Hazeh, because on this day, Yechaper. So listen closely to the wording. It says like this, Ki, because, Bayom Hazeh, on this special day, Yechaper, he atones, Aleichem, on you. You already can hear. He's atoning. If Aleichem means on you, so now we can understand that the Aleichem, you also grab a Likutei Torah. So the Aleichem, which means upon you, means it's fixing the encompassing lights. It's fixing the surrounding lights. What are above you? Aleichem. What is higher than you? That's number one. But then it says, after Tav Chav Tes, all the way in the end of Pashas Achrei. So, but then it says, Letaher, to purify, Eschem, you, which means there's two parts to the purification. You know, you took bays. That's not it. You have to get the other ones, the ones that have both. The atonement has to be both Aleichem, right? Following? The atonement has to be Aleichem, upon you, to fix the deficiency in the encompassing lights, and also Letaher Eschem, to purify you, which means the internal element, to fix on the external. Pirish Yechaper Aleichem Letaher Eschem Hainu, to purify you from both levels. Mahamakifim de Noiga, from the encompassing lights of the Klippa. Kamoy Ma'akovid Vegasos, from the blemishes which we cause through seeking, being honor chasers, and gasos, and the general density of self. Shemehem leka. Now, interesting. The encompassing klipa, he says, you can't redirect that energy for holiness. We know, for example, let's say a person ate in a gluttonous manner, which we know whenever we eat, even when we eat kosher food, when we're eating in a gluttonous manner, meaning it doesn't have to be super gluttonous, but the fact that one is not having mindfulness for something holy and is lost in the pleasure and in the enjoyment of the food, which sadly we do all the time. So when that happens, we're ingesting klipa energy, unholy energy, which means energy that is concealing God. Fine. But what happens? You got lost in the eating, you enjoy it, and then you realize what's happened to me. I got so caught up in that enjoyment, I forgot that there is a purpose and mission and life, and I forgot to connect to life, to true life. I got lost in the externality of klipa, and then you decide that and you feel bad about it. So does that energy have to remain unholy all the time? The answer is even without tshuva, you can fix it. Why? Because after everything is said and done, when you ate, what happened to the food? The food turns into fuel. Now you have energy. If you go and take that energy and go study Torah, so you sublimate it. You go and you pray, you sublimate it. You go and you do a mitzvah. You're converting that energy and you're directing it towards holiness. But what happens if a person is pursuing covet, honor? You boasted, you enjoyed so much that everybody's clapping for you, or everybody this, or everybody's noticing, as he spoke earlier, dressing with all the fancy clothing to get attention and so on and so forth, just the people, which is also a form of dark energy of klipa. I'm going to take that after you got it, what do you do with it? You can't transfer that. It's klipa that doesn't have a usage now after done. If you're the holy Ruzhiner and you're wearing holy garments of this, from the very beginning, it was never about you. It was you're a complete vehicle and transmitter of godliness, and therefore you should be dressed well because it's Hashem's honor. Nothing to do with you. That it was from the very beginning holy. It was never klipa to begin with. But if it's klipa, you can't switch that. So therefore, he says, that's what he's saying. the Makifim, the Noga, the encompassing powers of Klipas Noiga, Kamoy Mahakovid, the Gasus from the honor. Shemehem Leka Biur, that you can't extract and elevate, Vahala. That just needs to be, God has to wipe away that dark energy. Kiyem Lios Machisi Ka'av Psha'echa. For that, God removes it. I erase like a thick cloud. And that's like a cloud hovering, a dark cloud hovering upon a person. On Yom Kippur, God blows upon you, gives one blow, and all those dark clouds disappear. Uka'anan, and like a thick cloud, Chateisecha. Av is a thick cloud. Ka'anan is a light cloud. Chateisecha, your unintentional sins. But the other form of corruption, which are the internalized elements of the klipa. Kamoy hataiva, that which we ingest through the lustful eating, the sevoy a yayin, through the guzzling of wine, the zoylale basar, and the stuffing oneself with meat. You have much more control over it. Why? Because you internalized it. So it's inside of you. Beguf, the encompassing lights, you can't fix it. You don't have a grasp on them. But the food, you internalize it. You have it in you. So now you can direct it. It could be elevated afterwards. When you daven, with the depth of the heart. In other words, and therefore, because we can fix it, that's why Hashem wants us to be, even on Yom Kippur, when God is doing all the work for us, He wants us to engage in the fixing. Whatever God knows that only He can remove, that only He can blow upon us and remove it, that He will do. But whatever we can redirect our energies to fix it, that He wants us to participate, even on Yom Kippur. That's why He says like this, Ki bayom hazeh yechaper aleichem, upon you, which is the klipa surrounding you, that God is yechaper, Hashem is going to fix. But mikol chateisechem, from your own sins, lifnei Hashem, titharu, you should purify yourself. Which means that's already engaging and involving self as well. And the way it happens on Yom Kippur, obviously you don't have that right now, you don't have the food that you ate 6 months ago, is not in you. But to a certain degree, there's some DNA left of that. There's still substance in it. And by Yom Kippur, a person firmly rerouting themselves to be devoted towards Hashem and His Torah and His mitzvahs, you're actually having an impact. Imagine, it's just so awesome, I never thought about this. Imagine on Yom Kippur, wow, this is crazy. Because you reroute yourself, you just now fixed all the lunches, all the dinners, all the snacks, all that guzzling, all that non-godly moments, because you still have some bit of that inside, and it's now being diverted and directed towards holiness. So Hashem is asking, Lifnei Hashem. Oh. But there's another difference which we have to notice. Very important. And that is that when it comes to the aleichem, the encompassing energies, what does it say? Ki bayom hazeh yechaper, He will atone. It doesn't say who. It doesn't say God. Obviously we know it's God. But it doesn't say yechaper Hashem. It says yechaper, He will atone. When it comes to titharu, you should purify, it says Hashem's name. Yud Kei Vav Kei. But it says Lifnei Hashem, which Lifnei means before, that in front of God you will stand clean, but Lifnei also means above and higher than Yud Kei Vav Kei. Lifnei means higher than Yud Kei Vav Kei, above Yud Kei Vav Kei. So what does that mean? Above Yud Kei Vav. And why over here does it say Yechaper? It doesn't even say who. He. The answer is like this. There is Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is God's name, is referring to Oiros Bekalim, lights and vessels. That's the spheroids, the attributes. And that's blemished when we're lacking in Torah and through which Torah is internalized, and through the eating overly indulged. General sins, a lot, but even if someone, the Alter Rebbe is trying to give Hasidus to people who never sin. And to them he's saying, just indulging a little bit in food, they ate a little piece of herring over there without mindful thing, there was a blemish. So the Alter Rebbe is saying to this individual, he's talking to us also, because it's forgiven for everything. So here's the thing. The blemishes of Avaya, of Yudke Vavke, you always need to go beyond the place where you blemish to fix. So if there is a blemish in Yudke Vavke, which is in the internal lights, the way Titharu, which we engage in the fixing, but we wait for Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur we can access Lifnei Havaya, higher than Yudke Vavke, which means we can rise up to the encompassing lights, and from above Yudke Vavke, which is the Keter, the crown element, from there we can fix Yudke Vavke. However, when it comes to the blemishes on a more subtle level, the blemishes that are happening in our Keser through the pursuit of covet, the blemishes that are happening in the encompassing lights, for that you can't draw from Lifnei Havaya, from higher than Havaya. You have to go Lifnei Havaya. Above. That's why over here it doesn't even say Lifnei Havaya. It says Yechaper He. We don't even know who we. We can't even call the He anymore Lifnei Hashem, because He's beyond Lifnei Hashem. And that's corresponding to the two cleansing that have to happen. That's the idea. Ki Bayom Hazeh Yechaper. Valzeh Nemar, and that's why it says Mikol Chatisechem. First, he's talking about the second level. Titaru Atem. You have to shake yourself off yourself from your own impure, internalized impurities. When it comes to the makif lights, you're helpless. You need God to blow those clouds away, those dark clouds away. But he doesn't emphasize what I just said about Lifnei Hashem, but the Mittler Rebbe. That's what I was reading earlier. When you came in earlier, I was reading the Mittler Rebbe. He's medayek that over here it's Yechaper him, or maybe in the mimer itself, over here in the main mimer, this is a Biur in the mimer, he makes that distinction. He says something beautiful. We know that one of the things that we used to use, one of the methods of atonement, besides Yom Kippur, was karbonis, was sacrifice. And by sacrifices, we find there were two main parts of a sacrifice, which went on the altar. One was, the first thing was the sprinkling of the blood. They would slaughter the animal, catch the blood, and sprinkle the blood. The second thing was they would take the fats, certain parts of the animal, and they would burn it on the altar. So he's explaining these two parts, the sprinkling of the blood, and then the hekter chalavim, and the offering and the burning, refer to these two tikkunim, on the internal element and on the external, on the encompassing level. Why? I'll explain it inside. Sprinkling of the blood, and burning of the insides of the animal. Usually, which was mainly the fats. Which is chelev, which is chelev, fat is a food. It's a food. But we know that fats we're not allowed to eat. Most fat of an animal we're not allowed to eat. There's only certain things that are not called chelev, they're called shumin, and we're allowed to eat. But generally, that's part of the process of making kosher an animal, is to remove the forbidden fats. But those fats went on the altar. Even though it's a prohibition. Now, what are you doing? You're taking something that's a prohibition. You're taking an edible thing that is a prohibition, and you're offering it on the altar. So what is that reflecting? Forbidden food that went inside us. Not forbidden in the sense that it's forbidden, but in the sense that it was not eaten in a holy way, which is in the sense, therefore, it's impure. And then, what are you doing? We said earlier, you can redirect that energy. You can put it on the altar. So this tikkun is reflected in the chelev. It can be elevated into godliness through the fire from above. There was a fire that came down that looked like a lion, which the word Aryeh stands for Or Yudke. It's the light of the Yudke. It's the energies of 45, which is B'chlal, the power of Yudke Vavke, which is the power of Tikkun. Is that when you B'nidei Apnimiyim? This is called the Biur of the internal elements. Ayidei Tshuva, through Tshuva. But Zrika Sadam, but the sprinkling of the blood, over here. First of all, that didn't get burnt on the fire. It didn't get included in the fire at all. Actually, you threw it, where did they sprinkle it? Towards the wall, and it would drip down. It wouldn't go on the fire. Why? Because over here, you're not fixing. Here you need what the main thing you're doing with sprinkling of the blood is you want to evoke the most transcendental lights. And those transcendental lights are called gevura because they're too intense for the vessels. Very powerful. How do you evoke them? You take blood, which blood is gevura, and you throw it, which is the idea of, it's like a force. It literally triggers the most transcendental encompassing lights. And what does that do? That blows away the dark clouds, the subconscious negative energies that sometimes hover above us, that we don't feel, but yet it gets blown away. Gavuras al yoines b'makoira gavuras, from the source of gevura the tayu li'asayadei zekliya, which causes a ending, and it doesn't get sublimated. It just blows away because the blood doesn't get burnt on the mizbeach. Lahamakifim the noiga. It blows away the impure energies, encompassing energies of klipas noiga. B'zeu kipayoyim hazeh yechaper. That's why, again, on the first level, it says yechaper. It doesn't say who. Mandalesle shem yediyah, a being that has no name, no knowable name, because it's referring to Atika Kadisha, the Ancient of Days, which is beyond all name. It's above the encompassing energy. And it's definitely higher than the indwelling light. And how do you reach all of this? It's because you go into your own neshama. You reach your own essence, and that opens us up to God's essence. We reach our own white clothing, garments, and the Kohen Gadol helps us get there. From our depths, I call out to you. So let's do quickly. He concludes over here, Letoisvis Biur, added explanation on this inyan. With this powerful revelation. We have one small little paragraph over here to finish. Which is above these, the makif energies called the Gilgolas, the skull, and the source of the internal light called Moyach Stima, the hidden Moyach. And Yom Kippur we go even higher. The Inyan who, and the idea is as follows: Kihine, this that we speak, very briefly, this that we mention, indwelling lights and encompassing lights, we can only speak of that once we're talking about something to encompass or something to enclose. Something can be invested, or that means there has to be vessels. When there is vessels, you can say what fits in the vessel, or what spills over the vessel. But prior to the level of vessels, where no vessels exist yet, so there's no over there. You're not speaking about energies that are in or above. There's nothing to be above even. So in Hashem's light, there are levels where there's no vessels. There's nothing there. It's sensed in that realm. There's nothing but Him. Everything is canceled in Him, to the point that there's nothing there, only Him. On that level, where God is private for Himself, that's higher than vessels, and therefore it's higher than encompassing lights or internalized lights. The Inyan, and the idea is beyond the entire existence of vessels. You can't talk about indwelling light or makif or encompassing lights klal at all. This that we can talk about indwelling light or makif or encompassing lights after there's vessels. You can have an indwelling light, that which is enclosed in the vessel, or makif, an encompassing light, which is encompassing the light, the va'akeli and the vessel. It's encompassing both the indwelling light and the vessel. Above the vessels, above the coming into being of vessels. And over there, there's no or pnimi, there's no indwelling light, and there's no or makif, there's no encompassing light. We say in Oz Yashir, in the song by the sea, we'll sing to God because He's exalted over the exalted. So these are these two levels of exalted. The indwelling light is not exalted; it's vested. It's imminent in creation. The encompassing light is higher, and then there is higher, and there is that which. In other words, there is immanence, there is transcendence, and there is that which transcends transcendence, which means it's not even shaykh to transcendence. Pidishki goy u'maloshin isnasus. Goy is one level of isnasus, of elevation. Which is above the vessels. It's not able to enclose itself in any vessel. It is illuminating in an encompassing level. And that's called the Sovev Kalam. It's what we generally call the Sovev. It's encompassing all worlds. But nevertheless, and since it's called Sovev Kalam, it has some kind of a relationship to the world. It's an encompassing light. It has a relationship to the vessels. But the Ein Sof himself, he exalted over the exalted. Shuram, he is elevated, umisnase, and elevated, al hamakif, over the encompassing lights, vehapnimi, and the internal light, soiviv kalalman, that which surrounds all worlds, umimala kalalman, and that which fills all worlds. The Eina beged and alman kalal is not within the context of worlds at all. V'zeu p'chines atahu Hashem levadecha. And that's the meaning of you, God, stand alone and take a look. You alone. There's nothing there. Only you. And what's the internal words of the word levadecha? What's the bad? That's the garment of the clothes of the Kohen Gadol. Ksain is bad. Wear a shirt of levadecha. Go into the place of there is nothing but him. And from him himself, from there, levadecha daika. She'ein shaykh loy mesayv l'bchilas almen. You can't even say over there that he's encompassing worlds. And that's why there's a blessing that says, Hashem badad yanchenu, that God will lead us into badad, into isolation, to a place of alone. He will take us God will lead him, the Jewish people, into a place beyond worlds completely. Badad, into the place. Mashiach is called the Mitzayra, which he comes from also from that place of badad. That's why it says by the Mitzayra, badad yeshiv. There it means in the negative, but by Mashiach it means Bada. The Rebbe explains it's Limal Yusa. He's in a world of Amal Vada Yishkon. He's plugged into the idea of Bad. It doesn't have any relationship to worlds and vessels. Not in an internalized way and not in an encompassed way. And we wrap it up over here. The Kohen Gadol needed to be dressed in these garments of Bad Kodesh, of holiness, of linen clothing, lahamshich mepchinas Bad Kodesh, to draw down from this supernal level of holy linen, mepchinas Big Day Kohen, the garments of the Kohen, makifim el yoinim. In other words, he has to generate new makifim from beyond the makifim, and that's why he draws the Bad into his clothing. And this is also the reason why where is the Kohen Gadol entering? It also has to do with the space that he's entering. Because there is the worlds, and then there is the Heichal, it's called Kodesh. The Heichal, the sanctuary, is corresponding to the encompassing light. And the whole, because it's holy, holy means removed. And the holy of holy means it's removed from removed. Lefnei lefnim, he goes in, lebeis Kodesh HaKadosh. The encompassing light is called Kadosh. We'll move the and separate. It's not enclosed. That's what holiness means. But the Holy of Holies. And that which is beyond the encompassing light. When it's revealed this level, it fills all the blemishes. That is encompassing, upnimim, and in the kedusha of holiness, and everything is refurbished, and everything is refreshed, and everything is healed, and there's no more darkness, and there's only light, and we're ready for Mashiach. Follow. ... With this we conclude this awesome. Okay. May we merit the supernal whiteness to be revealed now, and only Freilich Hazeh.